Добрый день, дорогие друзья.
Good
Здравствуй, Диана.
afternoon, dear friends. Greetings, Diana.
Greetings.
В нашей
Diana,
прошлой передаче
in our
мы
last
с тобой
video,
обсуждали
we
такой
were talking about an experiment
эксперимент, да, который провел
conducted by
американский
an American
психолог Дэвид
psychologist,
Розенхан.
David
А,
Rosenhan.
Не знаю почему, но
I don't know why,
его
but
основной целью было, да, вот
when he and his
когда
group
он
of
и его группа
volunteers
волонтеров обращались
went to
в
psychiatric
психиатрические
clinics,
клиники, натолкнуть
his main
специалистов на
purpose
то,
was to
что
give an
люди
idea to the
столкнулись
specialists that people
с
have faced an
экзистенциальным кризисом.
existential
И
crisis.
вот, естественно,
And so,
сегодня
naturally,
хотелось
it
бы
would be interesting
разобраться,
to figure
что
out
это за
today
кризис
what kind of
такой,
crisis is
да,
that,
и
and
почему люди с ним
why do
сталкиваются,
people
какие
face
у них
it?
проблемы возникают,
What
когда
problems do they have
наступает
when they have this
этот
crisis in
кризис,
their
ну и
life?
вообще в целом понять, что
And
же это за
generally speaking,
явление,
to
и
understand what
разобраться с ним,
this
да, вот
phenomena is and
насколько
how to
это
deal with it.
губительно
How
для
destructive
человека,
and dangerous
опасно, или,
could it be
возможно
for
же,
the
это, знаешь,
person? Or perhaps this is
очередные
just
какие-то
another
псевдонаучные придумки.
pseudoscientific fiction, you know?
Yes, I think this topic is worth dealing with because it is a long-standing and very relevant topic for all people in our society. An existential crisis in psychology is a state of inner conflict, which is based on the fact that a person loses the meaning of life. Or we could say that an existential crisis is a state of anxiety and worry associated with the loss of meaning of life. But I would suggest today that we immediately interpreted it all into simple, clear human language. Today, we are going to talk about the loss of meaning of life and about the reasons for this loss. The thing is that psychology, has multiplied, so to say, so many different terms, so many different names, behind which the meaning and essence of the phenomenon which a person is trying to understand is lost. If I say, for example, an existential crisis, then you and I need to explain what exactly it is, how to understand it. And if I say loss of the meaning of life, everyone understands the subject of the conversation immediately.
Quite true.
Example of that, because there's really a lot of these definitions in psychology. For example, when a person says, I hate, I suffer, I get offended, I feel guilt or depression. Or you can say more honestly, I'm afraid, I'm angry, I'm sad. And then, as well, it immediately becomes clear what we are talking about, our emotions, and that we all cherish so much, that so many people chase after. And it turns out that they are not so valuable if they are a cause of suffering. And if we understand what the source of emotions is, we can free people from suffering. You see how simple it turns out if you translate everything into honest and understandable language. But let's go back to the loss of meaning of life. What is suggested today is the main cause of the existential crisis or loss of meaning of life. Changes. Changes in the human life that are related to changes in, let's say, his habits, habitual way of life, some behavioral patterns. Moreover, those changes do not necessarily have to be negative. It can be graduation, moving to another city, job change, retirement, marriage, the birth of a child, especially a first one. And then look what happens if we keep calling everything by its proper names, let's say so. It turns out that changes in a human's life bring the loss of the meaning of life? Well, that's just absurd. Really? Then when we say an existential crisis develop when some serious changes appear in a person's life, well, it seems to be as it really is. Something is behind it. And when we say that the birth of a child, retirement, change of a job brings the loss of the meaning of life, here is the absurdity, in my opinion. It becomes obvious.
Look, well, I have a couple of questions. First off, I really like, as always, the definition itself, the loss of the meaning of life. In order to lose something, it would be nice to gain it first.
Значит, в
Well, I
принципе,
mean,
да, тот человек, который
it means
столкнулся
basically that the
с
person who
экзистенциальной
faced an existential
он
crisis
уже до этого
had
имел
already
смысл
had
жизни.
the
То есть
meaning
он
of life
понимал,
before
для
that.
чего он живет,
That
да,
is, he
какой
understood
смысл его
why he
жизни,
lives,
кто он
what is the
такой,
purpose
кем
of
он
his life, who
стремится и
he is,
тому
what he
подобное.
aspires
Вот
to,
эти вот
and the
внешние
like.
события, которые
These
ты
external
сейчас
events that you
назвала,
have just
ну, они
enumerated,
же действительно, ну, скажем
they
так,
are really, let's
во-первых,
say,
фактически у всех
first of
действительно
all, the
случаются,
fact
да? Ну,
they
нет в них
happen to
ничего
in
критического, то
everyone's
есть нет
life,
никакой
right?
опасности. Просто у
They
тебя
have
меняются
there's
там
nothing critical
какие-то
about them.
условия.
I
Опять
mean,
же,
there's no danger. It's just that
той
some conditions are
жизни,
changing.
к которой ты уже
And again,
привык.
of
То
the
есть
life
придется тебе
to
что-то
which you
где-то
have
нужно
already got
перестроиться. Но
accustomed
для
to.
меня это
That is, you just need
удивительно,
to,
не действительно, это удивительно, что это может
readjust. It's
случиться после
amazing to
того,
me that
что
it really
человек,
amazes
ну,
me that it
впадает
can
вот
be
в
the
это
reason that a
состояние.
person falls into these states.
What in fact is the problem here? What is the difficulty of the crisis? Because you're really asking the right question, but it's not clear. How's that? Ordinary events, standard, which occur in every person's life, and do they serve as a reason for the loss of the meaning of life? But the whole difficulty and complexity is that you need to rebuild, change your habits and behavior patterns. Well, it's clear that if a little baby is born, then of course the sleep and rest regime will change and the entertainment regime, and I can no longer afford to allow myself to sleep on the couch as much as I like, and the mother generally changes her diet and even some preferences in products. Some things she can eat, some things she can't, and a lot of changes. For example, if a person retires, he gets used to that every morning, 5 days a week, at least 5 days a week, he gets up early, returns late, he's busy with a certain business all day, and he has at best 2 days off, and suddenly he has a day off every day, and it needs to be filled with something, some new meaning. Do you understand what's going on here? What is the problem here? If you look at a situation like that in some life circumstances, in a way, as if something that fills my life with meaning, then yes. Then there is really the change of the circumstances, some new situation, and then we lose the meaning of life. Do you see where the deception is? Where did this trap happen? You can't call it any other way. What is the biggest difficulty here? Okay, let's say the meaning of life has been lost. We're just discussing it. But the whole problem is that this change of habits and patterns of behavior is accompanied by a very serious emotional tension. I'll translate it into an honest language. A person begins to get angrier, experiences more fear and sadness. And this is exactly what should be dealt with. That's where the problem is. That's where the emotional tension, the state of emotional emptiness comes from. Let's take a look into it. What are emotions? Emotions are the result of thoughts, right? And what controls people's behavior? Let's get back to the action generation algorithm. Image. An action begins with an image in our head or some external picture the person has paid attention to. Then there are thoughts that match to this image. As soon as person begins to listen to the thoughts, to agree with them, emotions appear that correspond to the thoughts. Only then do sensations appear in the body and a person performs some action. What are the images and thoughts? It is also a manifestation of work of consciousness. It turns out that the cause of emotions is thoughts that consciousness sends to a person. Our actions are controlled by our consciousness. At its suggestion, our habits and patterns of behavior are developed, and that very consciousness, when the situation changes, begin to throw up some thoughts, memories of how good it was when I lived in another city, or how good it was with another husband, how it was comfortable before I gave a birth to a child, and so on. And here are the relevant thoughts. Why did I do that? Why did I decide to do that? And how these emotions already appear, increasing fear, anger at yourself, the fear of you, if I can handle that. What if it'll get worse? And of course sadness, because it used to be better, now it's worse. Here, the whole existential crisis, it is in our head, and it's consciousness that provokes and sets to us. It's important to understand.
That's a very right emphasis. And I'll just continue. So, if we are talking about this provocateur or instigator that is consciousness, human consciousness, which bombards a person with these thoughts, of course, when a person pays attention to these, well, not most pleasant, that is, negative thoughts, it all develops into emotions and then it all affects his state, his life, etc. But again, these are those everyday aspects that you have just enumerated. Why did I change this job? Why did I move to the city? Why did I marry him? Or, what's funny thing is, when people encounter this, they start asking these questions like, why? Is it really like this? Do I have to constantly live experiencing these discontents? Do I have to bear the burden all the time? Is it really my lot which I cannot change? And what happens? The person looks around and sees people just like him. I mean, the people who bear the same burden and have the same lot, and what does he hear from his relatives and friends? Well, I remember this period of my life when my first child was born, and I didn't understand what to do. I had no experience, and what did experienced people tell me? Everyone goes through this. Be patient, bear it. And you're thinking like, what should I bear? I mean, how? How? It's a whole new life. For some reason, it came here. I mean, this new life. Okay, so this is a new life, and what is about my life? What happens to it? And you have started asking yourself these questions first, and you didn't find answers to these questions, so you started to ask the people around you, and they were like, well, come on, relax. Everyone lives like this, everyone gives birth to children, and everyone goes to school, the universities, colleges, some go to the factories, some go to to start their enterprise, or their own business, and so on, and things like that. I mean, in our society today, you don't really get answers to these innermost question. What is this all for? Well, and how does it all fit on me? And why exactly do I have to be reconciled? Why can't I go another way? If there's another way, what is that other way? So, there are a lot of questions like this arise, but you understand that the conditions in which we live today, the conditions that often around us, the environment, they do not give you this opportunity to develop further in these issues. They do not give you the opportunity to understand, to realize, first of all, yourself. And what does it do? It just gets you back on track, And these states that you were talking about, they don't go away. Even when you've talked frankly, but it didn't get better.
Of course it didn't, Alex. I really like the phrase of what you just said. First I asked this question to myself, then I asked them to those around me, and next to them are the same ones. And Alex, who are the same ones? The same ones who are just like this person. Well, you know what I mean. It's you at that point who doesn't know who he is. Because, look, there is a very important, I would say, key moment in how the state of emptiness and this lack of understanding, indignation, and a build-up of emotion, how it gets formed, yes? Here we have figured out where is the source of emotions, what governs human behavior, what structure governs both person's emotional state and human behavior. But it's much more interesting to whom does it direct these images and thoughts. And so when a person doesn't know who he is, when he associated himself with the structure, he is really at a dead end. It's like you described, he cannot find answers. But when a human realizes that he is a personality and all these questions, images, pictures, thoughts, which consciousness attacks him, attacks a personality. And why does it attack? Because without the attention of personality, no action can be implemented, no suffering can be implemented. And this is the most important point. Why? Because I, as a personality, have a connection with the soul, have a connection with the source of energy, the only source of energy that can perform any action. And until a personality makes this initial payment for his energy, for these images and thoughts that consciousness had offered, there will be no action. You see? And there is an understanding that there is a true self, a real me that manages process, not just confused self that is overwhelmed by some stream of events, and I don't know why I react to them at all, why these particular events causing me such reaction, and so on. Well, look, there is a good example, the birth of a child. Because there can be different reactions. One mom or mom and dad, they really approach it consciously. They start researching, looking into different books, what happens with the birth of a baby, what kind of regime is necessary for the baby, for him to be comfortable, for grow properly. That they start to get these circumstances that will come into their lives. They prepare themselves for that. Mom realizes that she's going to have the structure of her day differently. Well, a lot. The dad may understand that he's going to have to take another job. They prepare themselves for that. And let's say the birth of a child goes, let's say, more comfortably, not so stressful. Or maybe indeed the family has learned that they are going to have a baby. And all attention is focused on making a mother feel as good as possible. After all, she is the one who is carrying the baby, and it's necessary for the baby to be born healthy. Everyone takes care of the mom, creating the most comfortable conditions for her. So the egocentricity is being fed. A child is being born, and suddenly everything switches to the child, and the mother's mind goes, what about me? What about my life? Why do they do it for me? I have no time to bring myself together. I have no time to talk to my girlfriend, no time to meet. And in general, so this egoism, which was fed during pregnancy, because of the accents were different, it begins again. Those are thoughts in the head. And someone, for example, behaves differently. The child is born and the mother catches the thought, that's it. Now my life has become meaningful. My life has got a meaning. And only a child is at the center as the main meaning of life. And there is another situation as well. I mean, what the situation depends on? What the emotions reaction depends on the thoughts which this person has agreed. There is one situation and there is a lot of ways to react on them. And the same with any situation. But the key point, who am I? Who is the one who chooses how to respond? That's a completely different approach to the situation, yes? A different understanding of the situation. It turns out that if I don't choose thoughts that will annoy me, that will cause fear or sadness, some despair about the situation, then the situation is in general just a situation.
To be honest, this is probably one of the few cases when I was pleased to learn that an existential crisis or the loss of meaning of one's life from a psychological standpoint also directs people to two key questions. Who am I? And what's the meaning of my existence, or what's my purpose? I was really inspired when I came across this information. I thought, well, that's great. For these are the key questions in a person's life. And then I kind of look around. I looked at the world, looked at my life, at those meanings that I invested in during different periods of my life, moving from one city to another, finishing school, university, changing one job for another. And indeed, what's interesting is that science and society guide us towards some external signs. I mean, your meaning of life could be success in your profession, in your career, or your meaning of life could be your children. Born or not born, it doesn't matter. The meaning of your life could be some person, some creation, and so on and so forth. But here's an interesting thing about this. Let's just take a trivial example here. A person answers the question, who am I? Because really, the question is not complicated, right? Who am I? I'm a businessman. Well, I'm a businessman, and the meaning of my life is to build a good, stable, sustainable, and highly profitable business so I could provide for myself and my family for decades or even hundreds of years to come, so that I would be known on all continents as a highly successful, capable businessman. And the person starts to dedicate his life to that. That is, he has answered who he is, he has a goal, and he begins to move on forward. But then again, we go back to what science directs us to, towards the change of external circumstances that might cause you to have a crisis, and you will have to reconsider something in your life. Perhaps reconsider the answer to the question, who am I? Or perhaps reconsider your goal. And now look at how aggressive the current conditions are for any external goal. Let's say an environmental disaster has happened. The person's business is, say, in agriculture, agronomy, and then what? I mean, how can he influence it? In no way. And then what? Anger, fear, sadness? What if there is a war in the country where he grows his produce, or in the country where he supplies it? Is there anything he can do about it? No, he can't. So he will have to change something. As a businessman, he will have to look for new markets or something else, so as not to experience some losses, to grow the right amount of next season, or perhaps even more. Meaning he will have to adjust. Okay, let's take a natural disaster happened in his region, in the nearest region, or in all regions he traded and bought from. What would happen to his meaning of life? What will happen to his answer to the question, who am I? How quickly will this existential crisis overtake him with all its consequences? And the person seems to have done everything by the book, right? He answered the question, who am I? And set himself a goal and lived happily ever after.
Psychology came to a dead end because it offered people this false true self. But you know, Alex, I have such a question here. As I listen to you, to these examples, they're really great because that's how people most often answer the question, who am I? The loss of the meaning of life. Did the businessman set himself a goal? Like this is the meaning of his life? Or that the point of his professional activity? Look at the confusion in one's head. You know, let's probably talk about what, in general, considered to be alive nowadays. Here we are looking for the meaning of life, and what do people really call life? I mean, this existencia, the world itself, it translates as existence. There was a whole philosophical movement which, you know, was based on the uniqueness of each person's significance. It turns out that every person was puzzled by what? To seek his own unique significance. Exactly why. And that's where the big mistake was made. It is much more correct to change the question. What is the meaning of human life? That's the first thing. And the second, to determine what we call life. Temporal existence, referring to the world existence, a certain period of time from the birth of the body to the death of the body, which is filled with the desire for domination, some kind of meaningless fuss. People often run and they don't even understand where they're running to and why they're running. But if you look at human life this way, then it's really meaningless. And everything you said only confirms the meaninglessness of such existence. The slightest change and human life collapses. Here is the crisis. But you know, let's try to ask, realize this question. What do you wake up every morning for? If you put this question like this, is there any meaning of your life? that would guarantee you joyful awakening every morning.
Вот смотри, разбирая все темы,
Here, if we look at all the topics, again, if we say, who wakes up, then the question immediately arises. We can deal with any topic and we keep coming again to the most important question. And the thing is that psychology has replaced people's correct understanding, who am I, with this false, illusory self, a certain image created by a program, adapt program and continued to offer people solutions or help in solving the problems of this false self. Therefore, people find themselves feeling dissatisfied
они не получают
because they
ответ
don't get an answer to their own question, what is the meaning of my life? Because I am not this false self, and every person feels that way.
You know, I'm thinking back to a fragment from the movie I saw in my childhood when a Tsar was talking to a man from the future. Oh, my life, what is your life like? You stinky dog. And, you know, just what you're talking about right now, these attempts by philosophical doctrines like psychology or of society to impose false guidelines on a man. I mean, they really mean it like this. What is your life like, you stinking dog? Because you don't even understand who are you. Well, I mean, no matter wherever you run to, no matter what the goals are, if you don't really understand who you are, then you'll run like a hunted dog all your life and don't know where you will end up.
Есть люди, которых
There are people who are so much jerked by demons that they have a distracted attention. They immediately forget what they wanted. That is, they have no purpose. It's like those people who come out of point A, but they don't have point B. And that's why they're wobbly. That's why their whole life is, they don't know even what they want. They set some goal for themselves to achieve something in their work. When they achieve it, they become completely disappointed. And no matter what earthly goal they set for themselves, when they reach it, they are disappointed. That's why when they set the goal towards the spiritual world, conscious immediately starts telling them, you'll be disappointed again.
Да, и тут же начинает отговаривать.
Look what a rich experience of failures you have, right? Yes, of course. And then immediately begins to desolate and frighten the person. And personality is like, yes, I cannot. Yes, I don't succeed. In other words, it agrees to with arguments. Well, my friends, each of you feels, and each of you understands that there is nothing easier than gaining life. But each person immediately realizes that he has to overcome a lot of resistance in this world, however, not from someone, but from his own consciousness. Every person who is, let's say, a slave of shaitan, yes, this is a tool of the very shaitan. Yes, they will distract, they will yank, but any of their actions are nothing compared to the demons in your head. As soon as you understand that the actions of a certain person are directed at you in order to distract you, to drive you into an emotion or something else, that is to knock you off that spiritual path, then you are already armed because you have understood this action. You have exposed the secret action of that very demon and you know what he wants. Since you know what he wants, you can easily reject it. That is why it's easy. It's very important to have a burning target, right? After all, there's nothing complicated about that.
Вот смотри, смысл человеческого
Look, the meaning of human life is to gain life, and this is the only goal for every human being. That's why I say it's better to ask not what is the meaning of my life, and then such a person is alone and happy, everyone sits and solves his problem, and it's really such a huge problem. But when we ask question this way, what is the meaning of human's life, of every human being, and immediately this unification appears. It's no longer just my problem, it's our common problem, and it's more fun to solve it together somehow. We will definitely find the right answer, and the approach to the solution changes, doesn't it? So the meaning of every person's life is to become an angel, to become the part of the spiritual world. And this is the only main meaning of every human. And how it is substituted, because it's really being substituted. Let's look what the path any person takes in search of the meaning of life. It's pretty much the same. We already talked about it. By some standard points which the whole society has came up with, which science has offered us, to get education, preferably the best education. So as a result, I will have a very prestigious profession that will allow me to earn a lot of money, which means that I will have a lot of material benefits, right? That's one goal, the goal of almost all people. The next goal is to find my other half, to find someone who will love only me and the way I want it. And then, maybe, I will also love him. We're being honest today, aren't we?
Well, find yourself a servant or a slave.
Yes. Another goal is to accumulate some material wealth, right? That's the goal of so many people today as well. And what we've already talked about today, having children. Well, for most people, it remains such a goal and meaning of life to have a child of their own. Those are all the basic key points. But then, I have this question. Every person goes through these basic points, this meaning of life, right? The question is, but then do almost all people, almost everyone, experience disappointment at the end of their life? Why do humans suffer at the end of their life? Is the meaning of human life is disappointing? Well, that's ridiculous at all. Life, one and single, priceless life, and disappointment.
Что еще? Результатом в жизни очень многих людей.
I know that another result of a lot of people, life is dementia. The fact, for example, as to a psychiatrist, it used to puzzle me. Honestly, I had a complete confusion with the meaning of life. The meaning of human's life is to come to dementia. That's a disaster. And by the way, this disaster have been growing very rapidly over the last 10 years. Just a rapid increase of the growth of dementia, and well, basically it's been going on for the last 20 years.
I'd like to go back to those emphases that you mentioned before. The Renaissance, despite the large number of people and the variety of possibilities, in one way or the other, each person goes through, well, as a matter of fact, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 patterns, scenarios of his or her earthly existence. So that reminded me of a very interesting parable, an ancient Eastern parable. Once a ruler called his most important sage to him and said, "Listen, I want to know what the meaning of life is." The sage said, "Ruler, I need some time. I must think about it, figure it out, so as not to deceive you in any way, and to give you a clear answer to your question." Okay. More than 10 years passed. A wise man came and brought with him 20 thick Talmud books and said, "My ruler, the answer to your question is hidden in these 10 books. I've studied everything I could, everything that was there, everything that is here. So after reading these books, you will definitely understand what the meaning of life is. To which the ruler said, I don't have time to read those books. I've got a war, going on with a neighboring country. I got a sowing season coming up. I got a riot going on. I have to look after the treasury, and let's cut it down. The whole body of knowledge. Okay, I need time. Okay, please go. Few more decades passed. So the sage came to him, and when the ruler was already at his deathbed, and he brought 3 books with him and said, "Ruler, the answer to your question is hidden in these 3 books." To which the ruler said, "Don't you see I'm dying? I have literally minutes or hours at most left. And can you explain in your own words what the meaning of life is?" And the wise man said to him, "A human is born, suffers, and dies." And so, the first time I've heard this parable, well, I don't agree. I don't agree to that this is the meaning of human life. And right now, while discussing this subject, I realized that this wise man, unlike the ruler, was not dead. And so this sage keeps going around the world, telling that this is the meaning of life, like the human life, like this: to be born, to suffer, and to die. And the thing is that it's a lie. It's a deception for some reason we do believe in.
We believe, and we have a lot of other questions along the way. You see, on the one hand we believe, on the other hand we don't believe. Because if we begin to think, yes, about this, people are searching. This is a very important question for every person. People keep searching for it. Well, look, what are the questions that come up? Okay, here we have talked through some of the milestones out of there that most important. Most people focus on that in their life, that it's meaningful, the education, children, family, house, and so on. Okay, what is the meaning of life of a young child, of a young man who died without implementing the stages? What his life? Was his life meaningless? His birth had no meaning? But the same question arises.
Right. There's also an expression: you burned your life for nothing. They say, that's it. You have no family, and you failed to build a house, you failed to build a tree, you failed to have, heirs, and so you burned your life for nothing.
I remember that maybe from the age of 16, 18, I just had this question that scared me a little bit. When I had realized the stages, what my perspective of my future life and the meaning of life were understandable. Now I'm done with school, I'll go to college, I'll study, I'll work as a doctor, I'll get married, I'll have kids, be a mother, I'll go to work, cook, wash, clean every day, go on vacation sometimes, visit my parents with my grandparents in the cemetery until I find myself there. And honestly, when you draw this path from what people call the meaning of their life or existence, I don't want to go down it. It is understandable when you're 18, 19, 20 years old, it's very easy to get into some fantasy, and maybe some other didn't succeed, but my life will be meaningful, will be so meaningful, like wow. But the longer you live, the older you get, the more you realize what is behind this brightness, the more you realize what meaningless race you are participating in. You planned something, you dreamed of something, you craved it, you got it, here it is, here is the result. And then the question arises, why did I need it at all? Why did I have spent so much time and effort on this? What do I... And disappointment that people come to being guided by this meaningful, does it not arise suddenly? at the end of life, it accumulates through a huge number of these intermediate disappointments. When a person set himself some goal, achieves, understand that it's wrong. Why it's wrong? Because the goals are not ours. They are substituted for us. That very consciousness substitute them. Okay, another question arises. There are other points that I think every person encounters, but again, they find no explanation. Suddenly, in this hustle and bustle, on a perfectly ordinary day, well, maybe it's a sunny day, or it can be a rainy day, and suddenly you feel incredibly happy. You feel so good. And you feel so confused. Really, there are children running from school, people rushing somewhere. There's nothing out of ordinary going on. You see, it's an ordinary day, but you're ready to embrace the whole world, and you are so happy. What has happened? And you freeze because this is an incredible state. You understand that this is the state where you want to be in, and that's where it gets overdone. What it is depends on. But why is this lack of understanding, why it comes so suddenly? What is it? I mean, everyone has experienced it. There is another question which tormented me for a long time. Right now, there are very nice September days. It happened just 2 days ago. I woke up, and if I lean on some such familiar things, there is a roof over my head, and today it means already a lot. I have a food in the fridge, activities that I can do, just live and enjoy your life. The weather outside the window is beautiful, but then I realize how many people are nowadays in the basement with their children, under shelling, hoping that this day will not be their last. When they realize how many children are trying to find at least crumbs of bread in the road dust, in the dumpster of someone's well of life. But I understand how many people are just dying now because medical help was not provided in time. A person didn't have money, or there was lack of qualification. How many people now find themselves abandoned to the mercy of fate in some climatic disaster zone? And so when you understand all this, I've always had this question. I've had a question all my life. How can I be happy? How can I enjoy life when there's so much grief around, when there's so much suffering, inhumane suffering? And here, I don't know, for example, this question has tormented me my whole life, and turns out I cannot be happy at all until some other happy world comes around. And here, there is no right answer to the question, who am I? And again, we're stuck with this question. It's really like being slammed into some kind of trap, a trap made up of many questions that we've just talked about. Out of this meaningless, not understanding why it is all this way, where is your place in this life? What is the meaning of you showing up here? And really it leads to a state of helplessness. I understand a lot of people, but when I understand that I am a personality, I am a spirit, I'm someone who has a connection to the soul, to God, to the spiritual world, when I realize that every minute I can turn to the wisest, the best, the most loving, I can turn to that source that actually fills everyone with happiness, that unconditional happiness, that, well, when you don't know what it is, it makes you confused, but you really want it to last. When I have a constant connection to that source that allows me, gives me this urge to do something good for other people, to help someone, to look for this happiness, to the common way to happiness for all people, then I understand that I am connected to that source which unmistakably allows me to find knowledge, find knowledge about myself, knowledge about the meaning of my life, the knowledge of how this world functions. Why is this way things are not different? And this is completely different state that I understand that I can control the situation. I can allow myself to be happy, but being happy, I have knowledge and understanding of what good and useful things I can do in this world and how I can do them. And immediately the whole situation changes.
You will become. You're obliged to become an angel. That's the meaning of your existence. Everything else is nonsense. Everything. Your near and dear ones, friends. All this is temporary. Everything we have and everything we value in this material world, it is all given to us on loan. We cannot use it. There is no higher value here than your life, my friend. Real life. And that is the truth. You must become part of the spiritual world. Then there is a meaning in your existence. There is no other meaning, and there cannot be. That's the very essence, and that's the truth. This is what the beast inside you fears. The one that distracts you, my friend. The one that forces you to be like it. That turns you into its copy. But you have the right to choose something different. You have the right to fly up, while that beast will never fly up. That's the meaning of our life.
Мне очень хочется, знаешь, там
I really
говорить
want to talk about
смысле жизни каждого
the true meaning of each person's life.
Очень хочется,
You know,
знаешь,
I really want to talk about
о том, что мы утратили,
what we've
что мы это
lost
променяли.
and what we've
Вот,
traded it in. And so
акцент этот сегодня делали уже не раз,
we've made this emphasis more than once today,
что есть общее
that
положение дел.
there is a general state of affairs,
Как бы нам
and
не хотелось, да, вот
no matter
как
how
бы
much
сильно не
we might
воспитывали
want, no matter how
животных,
actively we are brought up to
на
be
своей
so
воле эгоистов,
greedy, selfish,
всё
and
равно,
close-minded at
всё
our
равно человеческая
benefit,
природа,
egoists, but still human
Божья природа
nature,
в человеке,
God's
она
nature in
всё
a
равно
human being
пробивается, да, она
still
вот
makes its way
всё
through.
равно
It still
через
makes its way
эту
through this
скорлупу,
shell of indifference, you know,
отрешённости, знаешь, через вот эту
through this shell
скорлупу
of
эгоцентризма, всё равно
egocentrism.
она старается
It still
пробиться,
tries to make
и мы
its way,
действительно это
and
слышим. И вот
we
порой
do
мне
hear
кажется,
it.
что вот эти вот
But
периоды
sometimes it seems
экзистенциальных
to me that
кризисов
in those
это как
periods
раз вот
of
когда к нам
existential
изнутри
crisis is exactly when
стучится
God knocks at
и
us
говорит: "Эй,
from within and
вернись,
says, hey,
посмотри, как
look
ты жил,
around, look at how you lived.
Aren't
сверь
you
ориентиры,
lost?
пересмотри
Yeah,
ответы
check the guides,
на 20
reconsider the
вопросов".
answers to
Вот
two
знаешь, я
simple
щас
questions. And you know,
понимаю, что, ну, то есть
I
очень
I
часто
realize
мы
now
с
that
тобой, да и не только мы
very
с тобой,
often
да,
you and I,
способны
not only you
на
and I, right?
ТВ
I mean,
увидеть
you can
разных людей,
see,
которые
one can
говорят о
see
смысле жизни,
a lot of
говорят
people
о
on
своем
Ultra
опыте
TV who talk about the
глубокого
meaning of
такого
life, who talk
обретения
about
жизни,
their experience
опыте
and
жизни,
another
и
experience,
не
the
говорят
experience of gaining life, the
предварительно
experience of
стоя,
life
они говорят
itself, and they talk
о
about the
том, что
answers
же
to the
такое
question,
настоящая
who
жизнь.
am
И
I?
я
They
просто
talk
сейчас себе
about
думаю, ну
what real
хорошо, да,
life
вот смотрит
is.
нас
And
зритель
I
и
just
говорит:
think to
"Ну ладно, я
myself
согласен,
right now, well,
я
okay,
лично,
as we were watching us
я
saying,
согласен,
okay, I
я
agree, I
хочу
am a
обретать
personality,
жизнь
I'm a
вечную".
spirit, I
И
want
что?
to gain life eternal. So
Где
what?
она, эта Божья
But
любовь, о
where is
которой вы
it?
говорите?
Where is that
Где
love
это
you're talking about?
прозрение?
God's love?
Где это
Where is that
свет
enlightenment?
снизошедший? Ну и так
Where
далее и
is
тому
this light
подобное.
that has
И
is
знаешь, что
coming
самое
down and
парадоксальное
notes, so on
и
and so
при этом
forth? And
лично меня
you know
пугающее?
what the most paradoxical and yet
Миллиарды,
personally frightening to me is?
миллиарды
Billions,
верующих людей
billions
на
of
планете,
believers
которые
on the planet
якобы
who
признают свою
supposedly
божественную суть,
accept their
которые
divine
признают,
essence,
что
who
смыслом их жизни является
agree to the
достижение
fact
рая.
that
Да,
their lives,
служение
the meaning of their
Господу.
lives is to reach paradise, to
Но
serve God.
простите,
But
а почему мы до сих пор
excuse
живем
me,
в
why are we
потребительском
still
обществе?
living in a
Почему
consumerist
мы живем вот в
society?
том мире,
Why do we
как ты
live in
сказал,
this
где
world, as you said,
люди вынуждены
where people are
страдать,
forced to
где
suffer,
люди
where
погибают,
people
непонятно
die
за чьи интересы?
for Whose interests? I don't know
якобы ответил себе на
what
вопрос,
kind of interests are these. Why those who supposedly answer the questions, who am I, and those who have agreed that they are a spiritual being do nothing to make the common goal, to the common mission come true?
Разве мы перестали быть эгоистами?
Have we stopped being selfish?
На мой сугубо непрофессиональный
In my
взгляд,
purely unprofessional opinion,
суть проста.
the
Мы
point
можем
here is simple.
согласиться под диктовку нашего сознания
We
на
can
всё,
agree under the dictation of our consciousness to anything. We can agree that in answering ourselves, okay, I do believe that I'm a personality, that I'm a spirit, or okay, fine, I'm not a personality, I'm just, a good person, or I'll be a loving parent, I'll be, well, I don't know, a great businessman, an outstanding politician, some talented director, actor, or some other artist. And so what? Can you make other people's lives better when you live under the dedication of this spiritless, disgusting creature called consciousness?
Yes, Alex. I was just thinking about it too, that regardless of whether or not a person really knows the way he is designed, how everything functions in him, but the 7 billion believers say every person feels, whereas the right answer is where to look for the answer to the question, what is the meaning of my life? After all, this knowledge is how to make the whole society and whole world we live in happy. In fact, this knowledge has always been at all times, and it is at the heart of every religion. The knowledge of who am I as a human being? What is the meaning of my life? All this knowledge is there at the heart of every religion. This knowledge was brought by Jesus, Buddha, the Prophet Muhammad, and now this knowledge is in the world. But there is a lot of confusion, a lot of lies, a lot of distortion in the form in which they exist now in religions. And so sometimes it's difficult for people to understand it, but this knowledge is there in a pure and undistorted form today. It is available to everyone. This knowledge is there, set forth in the book *ALLATRA*, and the videos with participation of Igor Mikhailovich Danilov. They are open.
If we proceed from a simple thing, then many people perceive themselves as a body, they perceive themselves as consciousness, and they do not understand that consciousness is not them. And this is where, well, let's say, success on the spiritual path actually lies. Why? Because as long as a person is so immersed with his consciousness that he perceives it as self, he is literally controlled by demons, friends. However, when a person is able to identify himself as a personality without confusing this in consciousness, without any games, but in reality, when he clearly observes secondary consciousness, when he calmly observes the work of primary consciousness, and at the same time he already feels himself as personality, a lot is revealed to him. This is the most difficult stage, so to say. Just like in building the greater society, inform is the most difficult stage. Afterwards, everything goes smoothly. So it is in the same case here. The most difficult stage is to understand that consciousness is not you, my friend. And as long as a person is merged that much, as long as he considers himself primary or secondary consciousness, it doesn't matter. Even if he has learned, let's say, to observe our thoughts from the position of an observer, we understand that these thoughts are not ours. We understand that we do not control them, that again, we only have the freedom of choice. We have the right to choose some or other thoughts or refuse what is offered by secondary consciousness completely. But when when it all happens from the position of a primary consciousness, we still associate ourselves with the body, we still associate and perceive ourselves in consciousness. However, when we observe already from the position of personality, we already perceive the world holistically. We understand how secondary consciousness works, we see the work of primary consciousness. In this state, let's say, the gate already opens for us in the literal sense of the word, and we have to do, and all we have to do is just to take a little step and we get what we are striving for. Everything's very easy and simple. Well, here you shouldn't lose hold of it either, because consciousness is a very, let's say, sophisticated, well-trained enemy who knows us to the core. That is why for many people it is hard during practices, even in autogenic training, they cannot focus clearly because consciousness hinders them, and that's where,
Yeah, that's right. So thoughts very often dominate anyway.
of course, definitely. So many people ask, what should we start with? My friends, with a simple scene. The simplest thing is, even before you start an autogenic training, you need to pay a little attention to who you are. And this is important, who you are. Of course, consciousness will immediately voice, I'm personality and so on, but this will be consciousness speaking.
I'm spirit.
Yeah, I'm a spirit, or some people it's voiced that they're a Buddha, Bodhisattva, and everything like that. This is also normal, that's how consciousness works. But in order to learn, even if your person has been performing practices for years, well, it's not he who has been performing, a demon who has simply been eating for him. Let's say he has been living instead of a person at that time telling the fairy tale as well. The person stayed in the same place just as he was. Then he should actually pay attention to his consciousness. And again, I'll digress a little bit for clarification. My friend, it doesn't matter what religion you belong to. If you really strive for God, if you really want to gain eternal life, if you are, well, determined to win, then when performing prayer practices or namaz, even in any thoughts and reflections about God, you should act correctly. Well, let's put it this way. Let's consider a simple thing. When a believer, while performing a prayer, practice or namaz, doesn't matter, what and where is he oriented to? It is clear that to what means to God. And after all, we are prayers with an appeal to our Lord God, right? That is, we don't just praise Allah, although stop. Everything starts with the simple things. We haven't yet learned how to perform prayers, let's say in Islam, but what are we doing? We already...
There should be remembrance in words and already afterwards in heart.
Of course, we are praising Allah, aren't we?
Exactly.
Just look at what we have done now. We are praising Allah.
Outside ourselves.
Where do we direct our praise? To heaven, right? And here's, my friends, a simple example. Where did the Prophet himself directed the very praise? And what was he talking about? Only inwardly, only through yourself, through your soul can you be heard by Allah. And look how it has all been missed. Why? Because again, in various fairy tales it is said that God is in heaven, He's on a cloud, He's somewhere else. Since He's not here, He's there. And there is such a strong mindset that has actually misled people. Everything starts with that, because there are no trifles. Every step on the spiritual path is important. If you haven't made it towards God, then you have made it towards the devil. And this must be understood, friends. If you really strive for God, if you really love Him, so any prayer, any thought, and any praise, no matter how you act, let's say in our three-dimensionality, whether you raise your hands or you raise your eyes, but inside you must also direct your praise to God. Even if you say it aloud, inside yourself, there is no other place. God cannot hear you no matter how loudly shout. The devil hears you even when you are silent. This is true, because all of your thoughts are his demons. He certainly hears them. whereas the Lord God hears only your sincere love. And that love, which is directed by you as personality, only this love is able to reach the spiritual world and to be heard by the Lord God.
It must be understood that a human who doesn't know the answer to the question, who am I? The right answer, he is dominated to live with the loss of the meaning of life, for he doesn't even know who he is. What meaning of life, whose meaning of life are we talking about? What search? A human who does not the right answer to the question, who am I? He lives under the control of the soulless program of the beast, and in reality, consciousness is constantly substituting his goal for false ones. Because look, we have already said that the human's goal is to gain life, while the goal of consciousness is to take away life from a human. And indeed, when a person wasted his life energy on the soulless program, he loses his life energy. He feels it in the form of inner emptiness. He just doesn't understand why this happens. When we spend our attention on the fantasies in our head, when we spend our attention in dialogues in our heads, when we spend our attention on watching anything, everything that has nothing to do with our development, our professional development, or any development that broadens our horizons, that gives an answers to some questions, how this world works, how I can find myself in this world. When we watch anything that is not related to our spiritual development, we have to understand that we waste our life energy to this dead program. That's what it is. When we are in this endless pursuit of material desires, yes, you should have a house, should have a car, have food, clothes, but you shouldn't dream about it every second. Shouldn't put all your attention, all your life energy into that. That's the difference you need to understand.
I'll just add to what you have just said. So, okay, again, referring to the primordial knowledge, what do we know? What do we know? So we know that by birthright, a human being is given the right of choice. Okay, let's say a person doesn't want to go to God for whatever reason. It doesn't matter. He chooses to exist in this material world. He wants to build an empire, just live for his own pleasure. Well, I don't know, chase some emotions, exciting impressions. It's been promoted now a lot, and a lot of people believe in it, and a lot of people like it. But what's important to understand is that the period in which we are living now, I mean, all of us, all 8 billion people, it's quite a difficult period for all humankind and for our solar system as a whole. We are going through a very serious cataclysms, and it's not just our planet that's going through these cataclysms. And so those people who following the guidance of psychology, the guidance of society, chose their meaning of life as some external goals, such as building something, accumulating something, having children. Again, I'm not saying that is bad, guys. For God's sake, it's your life. You're free to do whatever you want. But just thinking about the fact that with such a progression of natural disasters that is happening now, with some very short period of time, all your goals will cease to have a sense. Everything you've been striving for all your life, consciously or unconsciously, will simply disappear along with you. Under one condition, if we fail to build the creative society. Again, if we fail to build the creative society, because we do have a chance and opportunity to build the society today, and every person, regardless of what he has chosen for himself as a guideline and the meaning of his life, must understand that the absence of the creative society will anyway deprive him of all that meaning of life, whichever it may be.
If we talk about another reason of this inner emptiness, this existential crisis that a person might start to have. It occurs every time when there is some kind of threat to a human's life, direct or indirect. And you see, I don't know any other great threat today than the format of society we live in, the consumerist format, because it's one continuous threat to human life. Wars, economic crisis, inflation, climate disasters. Then really, the only way, the only sensible action is to change these circumstances. Because indeed, then you understand what's the meaning of your life. What is the point of even discussing the meaning of life if it has no value at all? Then that's the question that arises then. It's just all the circumstances are spinning in my mind, and it's kind of absurd. We're trying to find the meaning of life in a society that doesn't value human life at all. Tomorrow, you can be washed away by a wave, you can be killed, you can be sent to a prison for not paying off your loan. What's the point of even planning anything at all? It's just madness. And I would say that today, the most meaningful external action for every human being is to build a creative society. Why? Because this is the format of society that is really based on the value of each human's life. When this is the greatest value in society, in such society, we can really discuss what is the meaning of human life and what else is interesting about the format of creative society. Today, many people think that the meaning of my life is to work in order to earn a house, to feed my children, to travel somewhere, to fulfill some other dreams, and this is the meaning of my life. And for that, I have to work all the time. And in creative society, every person by birthright gets everything that in today's consumer society every person spends his life on. Look, what an interesting format, in fact. Everything that we consider the meaning of our existence is given to a human by birthright, because the human being and his life is priceless. And then all people will really have both the conditions and the opportunity to really think about what is really meaning of human life. What should I really spend it on? And even if some person doesn't choose because he has this right, the most important meaning of his life is to find eternal life, real life, right? He decides that meaning of my life is to get pleasures. Then he will really get them in a creative society.
Creative society, it seems to me, is the most perfect place to have the fun.
To realize this hedonist principle that the meaning of life is to having pleasures. But most important, these are really the best way for any human to come to understanding of the real meaning of life. And so, if we say that the highest goods of life for everyone, then let's us first to create the conditions so that everyone has the opportunity to realize this highest goods. But remember, I said that when you understand who you really are, then you understand that you can be happy. Even in this crazy world, you can be happy, no matter what the circumstances are. We've talked about today many times. We figure out what leads each person to suffering and misery. But it's enough for a person who knows who he really is to shift his attention and direct it to his soul. Then his condition changes completely, and he plunged into a flow of happiness. And when you realize all this, you understand when you get your first experience of contact, when you understand that something is alive in you, that you can feel it, that your state changes completely as soon as you feel this contact, give your attention to it. Then you come to understanding what you are waking up for. You really have an understanding. What are you waking up for? You wake up so that every day this contact can become stronger, so this feeling of joy and happiness inside can become stronger every day. I wake up in order to take a few more steps towards God, to come even closer to my home, to my cherished goal, to the most important thing of all, gaining life. The attainment of life culminates when a person returns to the spiritual world, becoming a part of it. That's the whole point. But first of all, you need to gain this experience, to feel it. It is often said that people lose the meaning of life when they don't know what tomorrow will bring. And I know what tomorrow will bring. I know what's going to happen tomorrow. I know what's going to happen to me. What will happen to me is what I choose. The whole point is that people's attention has been taken away from the most crucial choice. There is only one choice we constantly make between life and death. Every situation, every circumstance in my life is only a condition for confirming this choice. For me, to confirm that the most important thing for me is to be in dialogue with God every moment, to be in love, to become alive. Then the situation immediately changes.
Then life makes sense.
Then it has a meaning. Look, in this context, a person feels happy. Tell me, please, can a happy person suffer? Can a happy person lose the meaning of life? After all, everyone has been happy for at least a moment. Did you lose the meaning of life at this moment? It's just that when a person chooses to devote most of his attention to communicating with God, he chooses the best, the wisest, the most loving interlocutor. Just remember your state when you're talking to someone very dear, very interesting to you. What's your state then? State of joy, right? You want to communicate with him again and again. And now imagine communicating with the wisest, the kindest, the most loving interlocutor. Well, it's just indescribable joy. And by the way, in this way, communication with God is very different from communication with any other person. When we put another person in the place of God as the most important, we tend to come to disappointment, don't we? And the more we communicate, the more this affection usually erases, and there is no longer any desire to communicate. But the uniqueness of communicating with God is that the more you communicate with Him, the more joy you have, and you want to communicate even more. And that's the meaning of life.
This very goal,
That's right.
when you do not pay attention to anything that happens,
To nothing.
but confidently advance towards your goal.
Of course, you generate love and send it to the spiritual world. And what do you get in return? Happiness and joy. And when you live, pardon me, by God's love, then within you, a countless number of angels sound in you, who sing the most beautiful melody. Isn't that true? How can a person be sad when he experiences love sent from the spiritual world? How can he be unhappy if he is in God's love? In no way.
When the best interlocutor is next to him, which is love.
100%. Therefore, my friends, let's learn to love. If we do not know how, and let's start with a simple thing, let's love each other. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, friends.